school teacher is very, very demanding. There's low pay, and classrooms can have up to over 30 students at one time, and there are so many different children that have so many different ways of learning that it can be very hard to be able to teach one student and the other at the same time. But imagine being in the 1800s as a governess, what was considered both a nanny and a school teacher at the same time. Someone who had to not only watch the children as they did their studies, but also take care of the children while the parents were busy working or tending to the house. It was even more demanding back then and even more lonely and depressing than being a school teacher today was. In Anne Bronte's very first novel, Agnes Grey, we follow the story of the main character, Agnes Grey, as she becomes a governess herself. The story is loosely based off of Anne Bronte's own experience with becoming a governess, and all of the trials and tribulations that she endured while becoming a governess and tending to different families over the course of several years. My thoughts on this novel was that I thought it was very, very enjoyable. It was very relatable, I felt like, to anyone who is in the education field. Now, personally, I'm not in the education field. Many of you guys know I am actually an English major, focusing in creative writing, going into editing and publishing. But at one time, I actually did want to become a teacher. And that dream was kind of squashed when I entered high school because I really saw how difficult it was going to be to become a teacher because students were so disrespectful to teachers. They were criminally underpaid and still are being criminally underpaid in my opinion. And there's so much more that goes into being a teacher than I was expecting. So I decided to not go into teaching. But I feel like this novel is easily relatable to anyone who's in the education field, whether you be a teacher or a social worker or a special ed teacher or principal or anything really in the education field. I feel like we'll be able to relate to this novel because of all of the things that Agnes Grey goes throughout the story. The language of this novel is very old because the novel was published back in the 1800s. Many people don't know that Anne Bronte is actually the younger sister of well-known author Charlotte Bronte. So if you're ever curious of how Charlotte Bronte may write, if you've never read her work, I feel like Anne's work is very, very similar to it as far as the style and the language that is written in it. Because of the language and its age, I would recommend that maybe those of you who are very inexperienced with reading or are not familiar with older language writing should avoid this kind of novel, but the language is much easier to read than something from, say, Jane Austen's time, where it was much harder to read as this was a century after Jane Austen's writing. So if you are interested in getting into more older language writing, I feel like Anne Bronte is the way to go. Despite the age of the language, it is very easy to still be able to read the novel and understand what is going on in each part of the story. There wasn't really any questions that I had. I feel like the only thing that really distracted from the novel was the whole romance aspect that happened throughout part of the novel. However, as I say that, I feel like I can't really make that a criticism because although it did distract a little from the overall idea of the novel itself, it was still an experience that I feel like was very relatable because this was loosely based off of Anne's own experience as a governess, and so if she at some point had some kind of romantic relationship with somebody, it is important that she kept that in there because it was part of her life as well. And although it did not really partake to the novel too much, I felt like it was still okay to have it in there because it is bound to happen at some point with a governess being with different families and meeting all kinds of different people and so many other things. But although I feel like it may have distracted a little bit from the idea of the novel, I felt like it was still appropriate to have in there. Just wasn't my favorite part of the novel, I guess is how I can describe it. But overall, I felt like Agnes Grey was a really, really enjoyable novel, very, very relatable to any of you who are in the education field. I really recommend that you pick this up because I feel like it will make you feel so much better about what you are doing and the fact that somebody else understood hundreds of years ago what exactly it was like to be a teacher of any kind to children who are just impossible to work with and those of them that are a little bit easier to work with, but there's some other things about them that you don't really care about. So I really think that this is going to be an enjoyable novel for anyone who is looking to go into teaching or being any kind of education major or minor. So the next book that I'll be reading is going to be another novel by Bronte. This one was also gifted to me by Robert for my birthday, and this one is called The Tenant at Wildfell Hall. Now, I'm not 100% familiar with the idea of this novel. I don't really know much about it, but this was a novel that was published after Agnes Grey was, so I'm thinking that maybe Anne's writing will have improved since then, and maybe that will happen, maybe that won't. I'll have to see for myself, but I'm very excited still to read this. It looks enjoyable, and the overall length of the novel compared to Agnes Grey is much longer. The Agnes Grey was about 153 pages of story, so it was a very quick read, but I feel like with the language and how old it is, it's a lot harder to be able to read and takes just as long to read a normal novel as this. So although it may be a little longer, I'm a little worried that maybe the language will draw this out a little too much, but we'll see how that goes, I guess. Maybe I'm judging it too quickly, which is totally possible, but we'll see how this goes, and I'll see if the language is in any way hindering the story in my mind, which I don't know if that really will happen because it's just an older book. So, but we'll see. But thank you guys so much for joining me in this book review of Agnes Grey by Bronte. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below to subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And let me know what you guys think about this setup. I'm actually in my basement of my house in my mom's photography studio. So the lights are my mom's, the backdrop is my mom's, this chair is my mom's that she uses for like senior portraits and stuff. But let me know what you guys think about this back area, this like setup, because I really think I can use this much more often for other videos, other than my gaming ones, obviously, because those ones I can just do in my room. But I feel like for other videos like book reviews, for other videos that I'm thinking of coming up with, which I'm not going to explain just yet, I can definitely use this space and use it to good use. So yeah, but thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!